Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Cowboys Beat Podcast for July 27, 2024. And on today's episode, we're going to be recapping day 2 of Cowboys training camp. But before we get into the episode, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're listening on YouTube, and please make sure to leave a review if you're listening to this on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. So these camp notes are courtesy of Kyle Yeomans from DallasCowboys.com. He tweeted out hashtag Cowboys Camp Practice 2 notes. DBs are a step ahead, impressive without pads and physicality yet. Lance had a better day overall, showed off his athleticism and accuracy. BB's shotgun snaps also better. Micah and Nealon quick off the line, like really, all caps, quick. Tyron Billy Johnson with the stock up emoji. So those are some notes from day 2 of training camp, but I want to go over a few things here and let's talk about that. So let's start out here with Trey Lance. It looked like he had a better day than he did in day 1. He was described as more conservative in day 1, and it just didn't really seem like he was impressive in that first day for the Cowboys, but I'm happy to hear that he had a better day too. Here's the thing with Trey Lance. Cowboys fans should want Trey Lance to play at a very high level in the preseason, because if he does, somebody is going to want to trade for him, right? The Cowboys gave up a 4th round pick to go get him. I thought they overpaid for him. It didn't look like any other team was willing to give up a 5th round pick for the guy, and the Cowboys had to overpay because they didn't have a 5th round pick for the following season. So that's why they ended up trading the 4th round pick for him. But if you can end up getting a 3rd or even a 2nd round pick back, not saying it's going to happen, but if you can do that, then the trade's a success. That trade to me, I don't believe we've seen the end result of that trade yet. We're going to get a better idea on whether it was a good trade or not, depending on the outcome of what happens. If you trade him for a higher pick than what you gave out, then that's very valuable. But if you end up just letting him go in free agency, the trade was a massive failure, right? He gave you nothing last year. You traded for Stephon Gilmore and Brandon Cooks for less draft compensation, and they gave you way more production last year. So there's a lot riding on Trey Lance in the preseason here. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens because, I would say this. I think that the Cowboys are going to have a quarterback that can legitimately make plays this preseason. They haven't really had that in the previous few preseasons here, which kind of gave you like a wrong or a rough idea of what this receiver room looked like. Like you would hear about guys in camp going crazy like Jalen Brooks, and then Cooper Rush would be throwing them the ball in preseason, and you're just like, I don't know. This just doesn't look good. Right? And I'm not saying it's a Jalen Brooks thing. I think it's more of a Cooper Rush thing, but that's besides the point. So, I mean, look, what are my expectations for Trey Lance this year? He has to win that quarterback 2 spot. I don't know if he's going to. I think politics will probably push him over the edge in terms of him winning that spot, but he has to win it. I don't want you to win it because of politics. That's my expectations of Trey Lance. Win it because you actually won the job, because you were the better player. You were the better quarterback. That's what I want to see out of Trey Lance. Win the spot because you are the better quarterback, not because the Cowboys traded draft capital to go get you and you had a big name coming out of the draft. Are there things to like about Trey Lance as a quarterback? Yeah, absolutely. Like, you like his athleticism, you like his arm strength, you like his size, but there's a lot of things to not like as well. You don't like his experience level. He wasn't necessarily accurate when he was playing in San Francisco when you watched the preseason or the regular season games. Pocket presence wasn't great. Footwork wasn't great. There were a lot of things that you look at and it's like, hey, yeah, there are some redeeming qualities here, but overall, just not a quarterback that I'm necessarily willing to invest in, but the Cowboys invested in him, so we have to talk about him. So, yeah, we should all want Trey Lance to play at a high level, even if Dak gets extended. Even if Dak gets that extension, you should want him to play at a high level, because that means you could potentially get trade compensation back. And look, one thing that I will say about the Cowboys is, like this past draft, when they traded out of that spot with the Detroit Lions, they hung him up for some really good compensation. Like that 73rd overall pick that they got in exchange for 24, that 29 and 73, they held them up. Do I think the Cowboys will hold up a quarterback desperate team if Trey Lance plays at a high level during preseason? I absolutely trust that the Cowboys would do that. I honestly do. So, with that being the case, Trey Lance playing at a high level is great for everybody involved because if you don't re-sign your quarterback, then you feel confident about somebody potentially taking over that role, which, by the way, even if you don't re-sign Dak, you're still going to have to pay for Trey Lance if he shows promise, and there's a market there. You're not going to be bidding against yourself. You didn't pick up the fifth-year option. I mean, maybe you could franchise tag him, maybe, but at the same time, there's going to be a market for him. If he shows that he can play at a respectable to high level in the preseason. So that's something to take into consideration. So yeah, Trey Lance playing better in day 2 of training camp, something I expected. I expected him to come out with some nerves in day 1, right? That's not too crazy to think because of how much pressure is on him. I mean, there's more pressure on him than there is on Dak. We all know what Dak's capable of. Even Dak himself, he's got to prove that he's worth a contract. No, he doesn't. Because if he doesn't get signed in Dallas, he's going to get signed somewhere else. There's no pressure on Dak. Dak's going to get paid regardless. There's way more pressure on Trey Lance because this is going to define whether or not he's going to be in the NFL or not, whether or not he's going to have an NFL career. There is far more pressure on Trey Lance than there is on Dak Prescott. And I think you're seeing that. And I think you saw a little bit of that in the first day. There were some nerves there. He worked out some of the nerves. And now it looks like in day 2, he's played much better. And that's something you want to say. As a Cowboys fan, even if they extend Dak, I think they do extend Dak. I've been on record saying that. But even still, I would love for Trey Lance to play at a high level just because, another thing I didn't talk about is what if he's got to play? And if he plays now, you have a good backup if he's still on the team, if he doesn't get traded to another team. I mean, there's plenty of teams out there that need a quarterback. I would have to look around the league to give you like a better, hey, this team for sure needs a quarterback. I look at the Raiders as a team, but then again, I think they want to see what they have in Aiden O'Connell, right? So we're going to have to wait and see from that perspective. But I do believe that there's going to be a market for Trey Lance if he shows out in preseason because there's always a market for good young quarterbacks. I mean, there always is. And we'll see if Trey Lance is one of those guys. We'll see if he fits that description. So far, he hasn't, but you never know. Hopefully, he can continue this level of play. So let's talk about these defensive ends. It is being reported that Marshawn Nealon is doing some really good things over there in Oxnard at Cowboys training camp. Here's the thing. When I look at this defensive end room, Marshawn Nealon and Sam Williams, one of those guys has to step up this upcoming season and become a legitimate starting defensive end that the Cowboys can play opposite of Tank Lawrence. Now, Micah Parsons can play defensive end. We all know this. He can play this at a very high level. But I think they're going to prioritize using Micah Parsons more as a chess piece. And I think if you have a legitimate starting defensive end opposite of Tank Lawrence, you're going to be allowed to do that. Now, when we look at the two guys that could potentially fill that role, you're looking at Marshawn Nealon. His thing is he's really good against the run. Coming out of college, you want to see more as a pass rusher. And Sam Williams, his thing is he can rush the passer, but there's some problems with his discipline in the run game. He's not a great run defender, but those things can be worked on. I think that Sam Williams has the potential to be a really good run defender, and I think Marshawn Nealon has potential to be a good pass rusher. You're already hearing some things coming out of training camp that he looks a lot quicker than what he did coming out of college. So those guys stepping up and establishing themselves as legitimate starting defensive ends is going to be big for this team. And if they can do that, this defense is going to be even better than what I think they're going to be, which is one of the best defenses in football this upcoming season. I really feel good about this defense. I don't know if I felt as good about this defense as I did last season. And here's the reason why. I think they'll be better this season than they were last season. But going into last season, they had that really good playoff performance against the San Francisco 49ers, and they added Stephon Gilmore. And I was a lot higher on Dan Quinn coming into last season than I was how I thought about him exiting last season. And I do think that I'm a bit scarred from that Green Bay playoff game and some of the games that we saw at the end of last season when it comes to the Bills, the Seahawks, even earlier in the season with the Cardinals and the 49ers. I think I'm a bit scarred from that standpoint. So if I wasn't as scarred, I'd be very high on this defense. And I'm still very high on this defense. But last year, I thought they were going to be the best defense in the National Football League. Now, I think they can be that this year. I think they can be. I don't know if they will, but I think they can be. And it starts with getting a legitimate starting defensive end opposite of Tank Lawrence. I think I've said that like 3 times so far, but I'm trying to stress the importance of what these guys could potentially be for this defense. Now, here's the thing. They're going to need a legitimate pass rusher out of one of these two guys, Williams or Nealon. And Sam Williams, I think, can be that. But his problem is he's not a disciplined football player. Now, maybe we see some change in that when it comes to this upcoming season with Mike Zimmer and instilling more discipline within his game, raising his football IQ. Maybe Marshawn Nealon is a better pass rusher than we saw in college. All I know is the Cowboys need to find another pass rusher outside of Micah Parsons. Because if you're going to play him at off-ball linebacker more than you have the previous 2 seasons, while I'm for that, and I want that to be the case, because I think against the run, Micah Parsons is going to be able to make plays, there is going to be a time where we look at this and say, hey, these offenses are taking advantage of when the Cowboys are playing Micah as an off-ball linebacker. But if you have another pass rusher outside of Micah Parsons that establishes themselves as a legit dude, then those worries to me are taken away. You could still get pressure without Micah Parsons rushing the passer. And you want to know what? I'll say this. I think because the Cowboys are going to emphasize playing more coverage on the back end with what Zimmer likes to do, I think that you're going to see a better season from DeMarcus Lawrence. Because when quarterbacks have to hold the ball a second or two longer because you disguised something on the back end and now that made the picture a lot more muddy than what it looked pre-snap or even when the ball was snapped, that's going to be big for the pass rushers. You're going to see more coverage sacks. So, I'm very excited to see what they do from that standpoint because Dan Quinn didn't really play coverage on the back end. It was cover 1, cover 3. Hey, man on man, go beat the other guy. Go win your matchups. And it was risky from that standpoint. Playing as much cover 1 as the Cowboys did last year is a very risky way to play defense. And I think you saw some flaws in that defense that were really exposed by some high-level offensive coordinators. Now, last season, you were able to get away with certain things because of the fact that you were so damn talented, and there were teams you could just go man-to-man on, and you could beat them man for man, not just man-to-man defense, even though they played a lot of that. So, yeah, I cannot stress the importance of Marshawn Nealon and Sam Williams this upcoming season. And I think both of these guys have the tools to succeed. When you look at Sam Williams, Brian Broad has said it best. This guy looks like a really damn good football player. And he has the potential to be a really damn good football player. This isn't just an athletic freak. He's not. This guy has the potential to be a really good football player. He just needs to work on being more disciplined. And if he's more disciplined, if he can control himself, he's going to be a good player for this defense. But that's not a small if, right? That's something that might never transpire, him being a more disciplined player. And I get this whole thing where he wants to play at 110% because that's the type of guy he is. And I respect Sam Williams. I have a ton of respect for him. I love the story. Him being a JUCO guy, playing at Ole Miss, leading the SEC in sacks. This guy has legitimate potential. And when I see this guy play and I see some of the plays that he can make, I'm not going to give up on that. I'm going to work with him until the wheels fall off. And I think Mike Zimmer sees that as well. It's hard to not look at Sam Williams and say, hey, that is a really damn good football player. But if he cannot stay disciplined, he's not going to be on the field. And Marshawn Nealon is a guy, again, looks like a really damn good football player. I think he will be a more disciplined player day one than Sam Williams is. But he's got to be a better pass rusher than what we saw in college. And if he is, he's going to see the field a lot. And by the way, it doesn't have to be one or the other here. If both of these guys succeed and play at a high level, that's all for the better for the Cowboys. If they move on from Tank Lawrence next season, you feel good about your defensive ends because you have two young guys playing those positions. Now, Sam Williams would be on the last year of his contract, and we'd cross that bridge when we get there. But yeah, these two are going to be looked at as guys where we say, like, hey, we need you to step up. And am I sure that both of these guys are going to do that? I'm not sure. But I have high hopes for these guys. It's just on them to act upon that and become the player that I think both of these guys can be. So I want to talk about this receiver room for the Cowboys. I talked about it on yesterday's podcast and how impressed I am with this room. Now, a guy that seems to be stepping up is a guy named Tyron Billy Johnson. 2 days in a row, he's had a strong performance at camp. You're seeing him make plays on some of these tapes that are coming out. You see there was a play first day, Dak finds Tyron Billy Johnson down the sideline, puts a perfect ball on him on the sidelines, makes a play. Yesterday, he was being guarded by Eric Scott. He's able to create separation there on a comeback route, makes an athletic play to make the catch. So this is a guy that we're going to need to look at, and this is a guy that is going to demand our attention come preseason time if he continues to stack good days at practice. And when I look at this room, I'm telling you right now, I really like this room. I think it's deep. I think there's a lot of talent in this room. Now, am I saying that any of these bottom of the depth chart receivers are going to be big time players? I'm not saying that. The Cowboys need to find a number 3 option that can be a legitimate, respectable option in the same way that like Tyler Boyd was a respectable option for the Cincinnati Bengals. That's what they need to find. Because let's keep it real here. The 3 guys that are going to lead this team in targets, if these 3 guys stay healthy, are Lamb, Ferguson, and Cooks. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the target share is probably going to go Lamb, Ferguson, Cooks in that order. But I want it to go Lamb, Cooks, Ferguson. And the reason why is because I believe that what Cooks can provide to this team and the skill set that he provides when it comes to taking the top off a defense, taking advantage of the vertical part of the field. I think that Brandon Cooks could be a legitimate asset if used properly. I don't think they did a good job using him last season. And when you talk about what the other guys in that trio do very well, they're more middle of the field guys. That's where they take advantage of defenses. So if you want to create space with this defense, it's going to be very important for Brandon Cooks to step up and be a legitimate guy for the Cowboys this upcoming season. Do I think he could be that? I absolutely think he could be that because we saw it in spots last year. And even though Brandon Cooks wasn't necessarily used to the best of his ability, he still found a way to be productive last season. I mean, 3 times last season, we saw him have go-ahead touchdowns in the fourth quarter. Now, one of them resulted in a loss versus the Dolphins. I understand that, but that's not his fault. He made the play when he needed to make the play. That's not his fault that the defense couldn't stop a nosebleed on that last drive. That's not on him, okay? He had the play against the Lions and he had the play against the Chargers, 2 touchdowns. He had 8 touchdowns this past season. He had like 6 touchdowns past the New York Giants game. So this guy was a contributor for this team last year. That was a good trade for the Cowboys. Even when you look at the yardage and the production that he had there, okay, but he gave you 8 touchdowns and he was a reliable option when you needed him the most in the red zone. He surprised me from that standpoint, big time, surprised me big time. But, another guy I want to talk about, I know he's not a receiver, he's a tight end, John Stevens. Have you seen him? Have you seen how big that dude looks and how quick he looks for his size and his catch radius? Have you seen him? He's going to be a player for the Cowboys this year. He's going to be a contributor, right? And if one of these guys can step up, whether it be Tolbert, Billy Johnson, Cropper, Flournoy, Brooks, one of those guys, that's going to be big for this offense. Because when you look at this receiver room, Lamb's your number one, Cooks is your number two. I think Tolbert's your number three. I think Brooks is your number four. Wherever you want to put Kevontae Turpin, I look at him more as like a gadget guy. But I think he's another guy. If you want to put him at 4 or 5, whatever you want, 4 or 5, Brooks, Kevontae Turpin, whatever order you want to put those guys in. Maybe they carry 7 guys in this room, because I think ultimately the Cowboys are going to look at this room and say, there's too much damn talent here. We want good players on this football team. And because of that, that's going to force their hand into carrying more receivers than maybe you would otherwise, because of how talented they are in that room. Cropper, is he a guy that's going to step up and make this roster? I hear great things about him every single day. Every single day during training camp, I hear great things about him. Is Tyron Billy Johnson going to be a guy that steps up and makes the roster? Maybe. Ryan Flournoy, he's a guy I'm very interested to see what type of player he can be with his size and athleticism. I think potentially he could be a contributor on this team. Now, I want people to understand, I'm not saying these guys are going to be all-star, Pro Bowl, all-pro players. I'm not saying that. Can they be contributors? I think one of those guys, Tolbert, Cropper, Brooks, Flournoy, Tyron Billy Johnson, I think one of those 5 guys can be a contributor and separate themselves and be a wide receiver 3 for this team. And not only that, one thing I like about those 5 guys, very diverse skill sets. I would say Tolbert, Brooks, and Flournoy are kind of your X-receiver types, to where I look at Billy Johnson as like a Z receiver, and I look at Cropper as a slot receiver. So there's some diversity with those guys. I think it's fair to say that. And that's good. That's great. That's going to be great for this room. So ultimately, I'm very optimistic to what this wide receiver room could look like. And Tyron Billy Johnson is going to be a guy that we're going to have to pay attention to, no doubt about it, because that was a guy who really sparked my interest into making this topic. So, man, I could talk for hours about how excited I am for this wide receiver room. That's going to be it for the episode, though, guys. If you guys haven't already, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, make sure to leave a review. I would greatly appreciate that. And I will see you guys in the next episode.